Okay, for concept 15, we are going to learn about substitution. This is just a second way to solve two sets of equations. And remember, when we say solve, I mean to tell me where they're going to intersect. The difference is, on these, I didn't give you any graphs. So you're going to have to do it a different way. And that way is called substitution. Okay, there's 3 steps you need to do in order to solve two equations by substitution. And step number 1 is solve one of the equations for either x or y. So solve one of the equations for either x or y. Okay, and I'm just going to look at our 2 equations that we have and notice happily that one of them is already done. If you have to just solve one of them for x or y, the top one is already solved for y. And all it means is to rearrange. I'm even going to put that in parentheses. Rearrange one of the equations so that y is by itself, or it could be x is by itself. And so, yay, step 1 for us is done on this particular problem. All right, step 2 is going to be substitute the rearranged equation for its variable in the other equation. And I'll show you what I mean in just a sec. All right, but let's go ahead and talk about what the third step is. The third step is to solve the equation for the missing variable, and then something else. Hold on. Solve the equation for the missing variable and then that's supposed to be an and. That was not very good. And then use the answer to solve for the other variable. So, and then use the answer to solve for the other variable. And again, I'll walk you through all of that just so you have this in your notes. Okay. So step 1, done, because y is by itself. Anytime you get x or y by itself, it is a smart idea to put the rest of that into parentheses, and I'll show you why. Step 2 is we are going to substitute this set of parentheses into the other equation. And what I mean by that is if I say that y equals 3x plus 1, then this is no longer y, it is 3x plus 1. I really need that to sink in, so I'm going to say it again. If y equals 3x plus 1, then this y is not y. It is 3x plus 1. Okay, so I am going to substitute 3x plus 1 into this equation and solve the equation. So I'm going to rewrite my second equation, but instead of y, I'm going to substitute what y is, which is 3x plus 1. Okay, so I'm going to go off to the side here. So 4x stays 4x, plus stays plus, but now y is 3x plus 1. And then it still equals 8. Okay, I need you to see that all I did was I replaced y with 3x plus 1. Everything else is still the same. So now I'm going to solve this equation. 4x plus 3x is 7x, combine like terms. Bring down your plus 1, bring down equals 8. Solve the equation, so we're going to minus 1. Cancel. Bring down 7x equals 7. Divide both sides by 7. X equals 1. Okay, if I were to ask you guys to graph these and tell me where they intersect like on yesterday's lesson, you guys would draw a picture and you would graph this line and you'd have arrows on both ends. And then you'd graph this line and you'd have arrows on both ends. And you would say, they intersect right here, and you'd give me a coordinate. But a coordinate has an x coordinate and it has a y coordinate. And right now, we just solved to find only our x coordinate. So you have only given me half of the answer. So our third and final step in substitution is taking this x coordinate and plugging it back in to either this equation or this one, and it doesn't matter because you're going to get the same answer either way, and solve to tell me what our y coordinate is. So if x equals 1, you can either do 3 times 1 plus 1, or you can do 4 times 1 plus we don't know equals 8 and have to solve it, and that seems like a lot more work. So I'm going to use our first equation, and I'm going to put y equals 3, not x. I know that x equals 1. So instead of x, I'm going to put 3 times 1 plus 1. And that's going to be what my y coordinate is. So y equals 3 times 1 is 3 plus 1. So y equals 3 plus 1. What is 3 plus 1? It's 4. So my y coordinate equals 4. So now if I know my x coordinate is 1 and my y coordinate is 4, you need to put it together in a coordinate answer in an ordered pair form. So that would be 1, 4. All right, so again, a little bit of work, but I didn't have to graph it, and you didn't have to worry about having graph paper. So let's try example 1. All right, step 1 was you have to solve for either x or y. So I'm going to look and see if I can cheat and get out of step 1. And I can, because y is already by itself. So I'm going to take this 2x plus 1, and I'm going to substitute it in to this equation for y. Why does it go in for y? Because it's what y equals. It's saying y equals this, so therefore, in our first equation, we're no longer going to use y, we're going to use 2x plus 1. So I'm going to rewrite this top equation now, except instead of y, I'm going to use 2x plus 1. So 3x stays 3x, plus stays plus, but no longer use that y. Use 2x plus 1 because we are substituting that in for y. 2x plus 1. Equals stays equals, 11 stays 11. So I just rewrote that first equation, but I substituted 2x plus 1 in for y. And now I'm going to solve the equation. These are like terms. 3x plus 2x is 5x, plus 1 equals 11, minus 1. 5x equals 10. X equals 2. And that's fantastic, but that is only one of our coordinates. That's our x coordinate. That is half of our answer. Now we need the other half of the answer. So in order to do that, we're going to use that x equals 2 and go back in and make x equal 2, either in this equation or this equation. And it doesn't matter, but I'm going to plug it into this one because it's very easy, even in my head, to do 2 times 2 plus 1. But just to show you guys the work, I'm going to rewrite this equation down here. Y equals 2, not x. We know that x is 2. So 2 times 2 plus 1. So y equals 4 plus 1, which means y equals 5. So our y coordinate is 5. So if we were to graph this, which I didn't give you graph paper, they would have intersected. These would have been 2 lines, and they would have intersected at 2, 5. All right, sorry, let's do example 2 real quick. All right, either solve for x or y. Luckily, again for us, the bottom one is already solved. This time it's solved for x, which is fine. It doesn't have to be y. So we are going to grab negative 6y plus 18, and we're going to go up to our top equation, and this time we're going to plug it in for x, because it says it's what x equals. Pay very close attention to what we're solving for. If it says y equals, plug it in for y. But this one says x equals, so we're going to plug this thing in for x. Okay, if it has a negative, we're going to keep these little parentheses here because it's going to end up being a distribution problem. So I'm going to rewrite this top equation, but instead of x, I'm going to use parentheses, negative 6y plus 18. So 2, not x, but parentheses, negative 6y plus 18. Minus 3y equals negative 24. All right, so I'm just going to solve the equation like I normally would. Distribute. That would be negative 12y. I don't know what 18 times 2 is. Is it 36? I think. Bring down your minus 3y. Okay, so then we're going to combine like terms. Negative 12y and negative 3y is negative 15y. Bring down plus 36.
Look at Rocky's face.
I'm recording a video, but that's okay. You're fine. All right, so negative 15y equals, all right, you have negative 24 minus 36, so negative 24 minus 36. Negative 24 minus 36 equals negative 60. So negative 60, divide by negative 15 on both sides. This is for math 8. Y equals negative 60 divided by negative 15 is 4. Sorry, you can't see that very well, but it is 4. Okay, that is only part of our answer. Remember, we need an answer in a coordinate, and that is only our y coordinate. So now we need to solve for the x coordinate. So we're going to take y equals 4, and we're going to go plug it in for either this y or this y, and it does not matter which one. I would always use the one that's already basically solved for x, so negative 6 times 4 plus 18 to get x. So I'm going to use this equation. Now I've got a lot of arrows on here now. X equals negative 6, not y. We solved for y. We know y is 4. So times 4 plus 18. All right. Negative 6 times 4 is negative 24 plus 18. I don't know what that is. Negative 24 plus 18 equals, oops, sorry. That would be negative 6. Okay, so x equals negative 6. That is your x coordinate. So the answer is negative 6, comma 4. All right, next page. Okay, we're going to move on to example 3. If you think you know what you're doing, you can push pause and try this one on your own, or you can watch me solve it. And then example 4 is going to be your teacher talk. Okay, so for example 3, step 1 is x has to be by itself or y has to be by itself in one of the equations. And unfortunately for us, none of these are. So you're going to have to take one of these equations and rearrange it to get either x by itself or y by itself. And I will tell you, if you get y by itself on this one, you're going to still have a 2 to divide by. If you get x by itself on this one, you're going to still have a 3. If you get y by itself on this one, you're still going to have a 5. So in my opinion, I'm looking at this x that's almost by itself already. We're just going to have to do one thing to get it completely by itself. So to me, this one's the easiest one. So I'm going to take this equation and I'm going to rearrange it. X minus 2y equals 5. All I did was rewrite it, but I need to solve it for x. I want to get x by itself. So to move everything away from x, I would add 2y. And now I've got x by itself. X equals 2y, and that's a positive 5, so plus 5. And now that x is by itself, I can grab my 2y plus 5 and go into my other equation and plug it in for, remember, it's x, because it's telling us that's what x equals. So I'm going to rewrite this whole second equation, but instead of x, I'm going to put 2y plus 5. And I don't necessarily need the parentheses because it's not a negative. Oh, I lied. Just kidding. You are, because it's squished up against 3, which means it's being multiplied, which means you are going to be distributing it. Sorry. Okay, so 3 times not x anymore, but parentheses 2y plus 5 minus 5y equals 8. All right, we're going to solve it. Distribute. 3 times 2y is 6y. 3 times 5 is plus 15 because it's positive 15. Minus 5y equals 8. Combine like terms. Oh, that's a negative 5y. 6y minus 5y is 1y. I'm just going to call it y. You can put a 1 there if you want. Bring down plus 15 equals 8. Minus 15 on both sides. You guys are probably figuring out why I had you guys do that mini unit of solving equations before we could move on to this unit. There's a lot of solving equations in this. All right, 8 minus 15. 8 minus 15 equals negative 7. So our y-coordinate is negative 7. All right. I don't know. I'll put it over here, I guess. We don't know. Negative 7 is y. All right, so now that we have our y-coordinate, we need to take that and plug it into any of these. It could be the original this one, it could be the original this one, or it could be our rearranged this one. And I like that, because anytime we can stick it right in here inside the one that's parentheses, you can just kind of do it in your head. It'd be negative 7 times 2 plus 5. But I'll show my work, so I'm going to rewrite this equation. X equals 2, not y, because we solved and got y for negative 7, plus 5. All right, so 2 times negative 7 is negative 14 plus 5. Negative 14 plus 5, excuse me, is negative 9. All right, so x equals negative 9. All right, so our answer is negative 9, comma, negative 7. Okay, example 4 is your teacher talk. So try it on your own and then make sure you have your teacher check it. And we will move on to some word problems now. All right, I know that some of you guys struggled in Concept 14 on the word problems. So remember, you can always go back and rewatch it. I did go kind of fast, but that was because I knew you guys could rewind it and rewatch it. So go do that if you need to. Ace Car Rental rents cars for X dollars per day plus Y dollars per each mile driven. Carlos rented a car for 4 days and drove it 160 and spent $120, 160 miles. Vanessa rented a car for 1 day, drove it 240 miles, and spent $80. Write equations for Carlos and for Vanessa, and then solve them. Okay, so our first equation is going to be Carlos. Our second equation is going to be Vanessa. So here's what we know about Carlos. It says Carlos rented a car for 4 days, drove it 160, and spent 120. So if X is our dollars, Y is also our dollars. Oh, okay, sorry. So X is our dollars per day, and Y is dollars per mile. So basically we're saying X, I might write this off to the side. X is going to be our day, and Y is our mile. All right, that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so for Carlos, 4 days. So our days is our X. So we're going to put 4X plus 160 miles. So that's Y. So 160Y. And it was a total of $120. Okay, now we need to look at an equation for Vanessa. Vanessa rented a car for 1 day, and our X is our day. So 1 day, or 1X, I'll just call it X. You can put a 1 there if you want. Plus, she drove it 240 miles. Y is our miles, so 240Y. And she spent a total of $80. All right, if I gave you a graph, you might be able to graph this out, but since this lesson is over substitution, we are going to have to solve it with substitution. So our first step is to get X by itself, or Y by itself, or this X by itself, or this Y by itself. And I hope you guys are starting to figure out that probably what you should do is this X, because it's the only one that's not multiplied by some other number. So I'm going to take this second equation, and I'm going to rearrange it barely. We don't have much to do to get X by itself. The only thing we need to do is get rid of a plus 240Y. So we are going to minus 240Y on both sides. And then we will have X by itself. x equals, that's negative 240y, and that's a positive 80, so plus 80. Okay, so now we have two equations. We have 4x plus 160y equals 120, and we have x equals this. Grab it by putting it in parentheses, and we're going to take it all the way up here, and we're going to plug it in for x. And again, the reason we're plugging it in for x is because it's x equals that. So I'm going to rewrite Carlos's equation, but instead of x, I'm going to use negative 240y plus 80. And I'm going to use it in parentheses because the 4 is going to have to be distributed into it. So 4, parenthesis, negative 240y plus 80, parenthesis, plus 160y equals 120. Okay, we're going to solve it. Distribute 4 times negative 240 equals negative 960. Wow, these are big numbers. Negative 960y, 80 times 4 is 320. So plus 320 plus 160y equals 120. All right, these are like terms, so I'm going to combine them. Negative 960 plus 160. Negative 800. So negative 800y, bring down your plus 320, equals 120. All right, minus 320 on both sides. Negative 800y equals 120 minus 320. Negative 200. All right, last step is divide by what's next to your variable. So divide by negative 800, divide by negative 800. Y equals 0.25. Which is the same thing as 1/4. Okay, remember, unfortunately, that is only our y coordinate. We gotta go solve it now for our x coordinate. Luckily, we've got this little thing in parentheses here, so all we need to do to solve for our x coordinate is negative 240 times 0.25 plus 80, and that will give us x. So, to get x, I'm going to do negative 240 times 0.25, I'm running out of room, plus 80. Okay, negative 240 times 0.25. All right, is negative 60 plus 80. Negative 60 plus 80 is 20, right? 20. All right, so we wrote equations to represent their expenses, and then we solved them. So, let's see. We can actually just write it as a coordinate. That's what we've been doing. So we will leave it as 20, comma, 0.25. That was a lot of work, but I hope that you guys are starting to understand how it works. Okay, your last question is going to be part of your teacher talk. So either try it if you want. You'd have to set up your equations first and then work it out. Or you can come sit with your teacher and figure it out together.